I mentioned last week that I wanted to take a look at custom mutations and custom queries, and the main impetus for that was that it seemed like, based on my reading of the documentation and what I could figure out from the Amplify Discord, that some things like batch changes of data and other kinds of functionality that you want to automate required custom types, custom queries, custom mutations, something beyond what Amplify does for you more or less automatically when you define a schema and use a.model. So I want to share with you what I figured out in my experimentation. So to do that, I had this really simple app here. The data type, the model is a post. Just imagine a blog post with titles, content, author, URL, and additionally a flag called is archived. If you're curious, the lines come, the text comes sort of randomly from a poem by John Keats about a cat. So what do I have here? Right here we're displaying a list of posts, and we have this little select box there, and we can delete posts, we can get posts, we can archive posts, and we can restore posts. We can add a post here. Let's just say something very simple. And cats are more independent. I have nothing against dogs. I love dogs. I could say, and so we can add a post. And so there's our post. So although I've implemented a functionality for delete, in practical terms, in production, generally speaking, you don't want to delete something. That is, you don't want to literally delete something and make it inaccessible forever. Certainly there are backup strategies for any database that should be employed, but more or less, no, not more or less, but as a rule, people soft delete or they archive items. Some way to keep them handy, undo the removal, whatever you want to call it. But just for the sake of demonstration, I have implemented a delete functionality and a get posts, which will, all of these take a list of IDs and operate on that list, and I'll show you the code in a minute. But let's say I just select that one and select that one. So the one that has A and the one that has dogs have too many fleas, and I click delete that. It's calling some code that I'll show you in a minute. Let me open the console. If we get the result of the batch delete, we get a list of items. So just the IDs that were deleted. If any of the items couldn't be processed for some reason, they would be in the unprocessed keys. If I select a couple of posts and click get posts, we get those selected posts. So different from the normal list where you would get everything. And lastly, we can archive things. So you can see right now the flag is set to no for these two things. So I'll select this one and this one, click archive posts, and they become archives because there's a flag that says archive. And then in an actual application, you could have code that says don't get the ones that are archived, or don't display the ones that are archived. And we could restore those by clicking that. And if we do the same operation on that, it will just have no effect. So that's the front end. And now let me switch over to the code. So the first place to start is the data resource, and here you can ignore this one. This is something from the documentation that you can take a look at. It's just not something that I'm gonna demonstrate right now. This part. So let's say this is the to-do model that comes automatically when you generate an Amplify project. We don't do anything with that, but I didn't comment. I didn't delete it because I wanted to show the difference. So my understanding is that when you want to do these custom things or batch operations and that sort of thing, you can't use a model, the default kind of model that if you create would ordinarily generate your git post, list post, etc. So I defined a custom type, and it has the fields that we saw plus a few others, but it looks basically it's set up basically the same way a model is. And then I defined some mutations and queries. So here's an add post. If we want to add post, we provide these arguments to the function, and that function, that handler, is indicated here under the handler section. Theoretically, we could archive it from the start, but I didn't think of that. So these are the values that we're providing, and I'm not providing the ups and down votes, etc. So there are some values that I'm not providing. That's okay. I should also mention that the authorization right now is all for public API key, and ordinarily you wouldn't do that in any kind of real world app. It's too risky, too open, too free. And we indicate that it returns a type of post, and that ref refers to this custom type. And if we look under, in my case, I could have put these all under a subdirectory, but I didn't. So if we look at the add post handler, you can see that we get our request, we get a context object, we take all our arguments, and here I'm just putting in some default values for those other properties that we're not setting. We look for the ID. Since we're creating a brand new post, we don't have an ID, typically wouldn't, and so we use the util from AppSync to generate one. And finally, there is this this DynamoDB utility that gives us access to things like put, and that will transform its arguments to a format that I'll show you shortly. You don't have to use this, but it can be handy. So we return this. So we're returning an operation, and in the response we get the context object. We grab the error and the result, if there's an error, we can stash the errors, because we might and we will have more than one handler connected to the next one. So we might have results or errors that we need to connect in a pipeline. And lastly, I just return the result. That's add post. Get post is here, and in get post we do something similar. We take the ID, present it as a key, take the response, and just return the result. Of course, I'm going to share. I will share the repo where all this code is, if for your reference, and the link will be in the description. Lastly, we have a list posts. This is defining the type that's returned by the list post. It's not quite in order, but we have this list post query, and it returns that list post that we just defined as an items field that's an array of posts, a next token, and a scanned account. I will put links to the documentation in the description. Sorry for if you hear some background noise, it's my neighbors. Sorry about that. So if we look at the list posts, we're using the scan operation. This, which I've commented out, is essentially what this scan function is returning. This kind of format. We'll see more examples of that in a minute. So we call scan I've copied some of the things from the documentation. There's the items that are returned by the Dynamo scan. And you can look into the documentation for all sorts of ways you can use scan and the other functions. There's a little quote about working with errors and passing on the errors, appending the errors so that they will persist from one function to the next. So finally, we return the result of items. The next token is scan count. And you might note that these are all JavaScript files. As far as I know, at least the documentation only talks about AppSync JavaScript resolvers and not TypeScript resolvers. So I'm not sure if that's supported or if that's planned. Let's switch back over here. We have an update post. I just noticed that I didn't implement a working version of update post, so I'll just share that with you as a challenge. You can see if the code that I created here actually works. I don't remember if I tested it out. I will test it out, but I'm just going to say for right now that for the time being, you can give it a shot. Take a look at it. See if you find problems with it, can improve it. That's kind of homework or whatever. Finally, delete post. I didn't implement a version of this either, so go ahead and try it out. I created the code that I thought would work, but I actually did not try it because my focus was more on the batch operations. So let's look at those. Scroll back up here. So let's say you want to get a batch of posts. It's a query. You define it as a query. Say what arguments you're going to pass to it. In this case, an array of IDs, and it returns batch get posts, which is this type here. Items is an array of type post. Unprocessed items would be IDs of items that couldn't be gotten. According to the documentation, if an item could not be gotten, then that would also appear as a null in the items list, in the items array. But its ID would also be down here in unprocessed items. So if we look at batch get posts, we're hard coding or at least I did. I hard coded the table name. You can, in these batch functions, specify multiple tables. So you could do a batch operation across multiple tables. That's not what I was interested in doing here, so that's why it is catered just to the post table. So in this operation we're defining here, batch get item, we provided an object called tables, or a field called tables that is an object and can have one or more table names, and for each of those they get a key, or they get a list of keys, and we can use this utility function to map values to turn our IDs into the format that DynamoDB wants. And this thing is explaining what that is. You can look in the documentation for more information. And then finally, now that we have that item request, that's what we return in our request. And the response gets, again, a context object from which we can destructure error and result. And I've specified in my schema that this is the format that I want. So this is going to be a list of the posts, and unprocessed items will be there. Now we get to look at some mutations. So batch delete post. Where is it? Delete post. Batch delete post. So again, I've defined a return type following the same sort of pattern. This is a mutation. It takes an argument that is a list of IDs. And then we specify a custom handler. Let's take a look at that code. Here's some documentation. In our request, we get the keys in the format that we want, or that DynamoDB wants, I should say. And finally return this object that is the operation that we want to be performed. You know, I've provided in a comment what the context.result, what a sample one would look like. Sample response, something like that. And have some familiar code for handling the errors. I'm just returning the IDs of the things that were deleted and the unprocessed keys if there are any, and the next token if there is one. Next, let's look at the. You see that I have a batch restore post right here. I thought originally I would use two different functions, but it's simple enough to just use one and then pass an argument whether or not to indicate whether or not something should be archived or not. If it's set to false, then is archived gets set to false, and if it's not provided, then it gets set to true. Right. So again, here what I'm returning is actually an array of the posts themselves and unprocessed items. Those would also be an array of those items. And the function is a mutation. So you can see this comment here. I was thinking that there might be some way within the schema to provide a default value for an argument, but I couldn't find one. And this is for me, was kind of the interesting part, figuring out how to specify the handler and then specify these two handlers and passing the results from one to the next. So you can see that the first thing we're doing is getting the posts. And if all goes well, they will go to batch archive post. So we're defaulting to true and setting the archive, taking the forgetting all the, we already have the posts because they're in the context.prev previous result. So that's how things are persisted one function to the next. So for each one of them, we go through all of them and create these new posts to re-put in our. Actually, this should be named batch put item request. Let me show you by lifting up the terminal here, that as I make changes in code, the sandbox sees the change and makes an update. Generally, it's pretty quick, and you see the success there. And finally, so from batch archive posts, here we go. We get our results. Now, one thing I haven't explored, I'm not sure I have the logic here that would handle all the error situations. So that would be something to test. Something that I'll be investigating. But it could be that what if batch get item fails for some reason? Well, it should still, the idea is that it should still go to the next pipeline resolver and have unprocessed items, maybe. But I just haven't actually tested it or investigated it to be sure, right? Documentation is one thing, but I would like to actually test it, see what happens. And that kind of, before I say that, well, no, it's okay. The timing is right. As I said, I referred to documentation here, and there is lots of documentation, but there's this gap between, I found that there was a gap between Amplify Gen 2 and the documentation for AppSync. So in particular, something like something as simple as how do you do this? How do you specify two functions, and how do you get the results from one to the next? It may be there, but I couldn't find a clear example of it. I found it in the Amplify Discord forum, and I'll provide a link to that Discord in the description as well. So, and the other thing I did trying to figure things out is you can enable logs for AppSync. So in this case, I have this stare as amplified data, and it's by default it's not enabled, and you get charged for that. In my experience, I've never, for just fooling around, I've never been paid more than a couple of dollars for anything on AWS in the free tier. So I think it's fairly safe to just turn this on, but temporarily. And what I did was enable that. Click this box to, this text is too small. To enable all of that, and I set the field resolver to all, and that enables me to see, like right here, things that I log out from my functions, and that actually helped me figure out how to actually do things. Get from the code or the documentation on one side and my code on the other to bridge that gap. So I just temporarily turn those on, and it's easy enough to turn them off. So you can see, for an example, I'm logging out batch archive post response context object, and I can see, well, what's that, and then figure out that, oh, there's a previous property, and that has a result from my previous function. So that made it possible for me to finish the code and get things work. So I hope this is helpful. I think that's all I have to show for this moment. If you have any ideas for things that you would like me to look at, someone requested in the comments something to do with AI, and I do have an idea for a feature we could add. But I may, well, I'm not sure what I'll work on next, but I may stick a little bit longer with custom mutations and custom types. There are, as I said, no, I didn't say, but there are two different ways. You can set up Lambda functions, or AppSync. Let's see, I'm looking at the documentation in 1 second. Custom queries and mutations. So there are functions you can create, and then there are custom resolver powered by AppSync JavaScript resolvers, and they look pretty similar, but for this exercise, I went the route of the custom resolver powered by AppSync JavaScript resolvers. So maybe I'll take a look at the function route next time just to compare. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope this is useful. If you find anything wrong, let me know. If you have any ideas for what you want me to look at next, let me know. My general plan is to continue toward the app that I described at the beginning, the first video, basically a web store, e-commerce type app. So see you next time. Thank you.